Good morning, everybody. Or is it afternoon? Or evening? I don't know. Let me see, what time is it? It's like 5 o'clock. Feels like morning still. But welcome to Corey Hughes' Bloody History. Today, I'm going to start doing something a little different. I started doing video in the beginning, and to be honest, I'm not really a big fan of video. I know I do a lot of video for someone who's not a fan of video, but I really like audio podcasting. I feel like there's a lot more freedom in it. And so, but over time, I've had a bunch of people subscribe to the YouTube. And so I think I'm going to attempt to do more video. So I have to do the show anyway. I might as well record myself doing it. But what we're going to do today is we are going to read through John Armstrong's 1996 presentation at the JFK conference at Fredonia, New York. It was July 1996. I've already read through this, and there are things I just don't agree with John Armstrong on at all. And then there are things that I don't agree with him on because I'll admit I need to do more research in that specific area. I also find that John Armstrong will gather data, not know how to collate the data, and then therefore he will misinterpret it. And that happened a bunch in this era of January 54 to July of 1956. He makes some conclusionary statements in this presentation that I blatantly disagree with, right? So we have a lot of confusion over Oswald between, well, his whole life, but specifically, well, Armstrong would tell you September of 53, but I would say January of 54 through July of 55, this time in New Orleans, because we have evidence that Oswald is not just in New Orleans, but that he's also in Fort Worth. And also some of the data that is given, like a statement made by Myrtle Evans about the Oswalds having come from either San Antonio or Fort Worth before they moved to New Orleans in May of 54. His interpretation of this series of events is poor, to say the least. So those are my immediate observations of having already gone through this. So, but you can make up your own mind, and we'll go through this today, and here we go. My study of Lee Harvey Oswald focuses on altered, forged, or misleading government documents and structured witness testimony. This presentation consists of new information as well as items that have been overlooked during the last 30 years because they may have seemed insignificant or been misunderstood. This information may cause you to question the official story of Lee Harvey Oswald's life. As you begin to see unusual occurrences and puzzling photographs throughout his life, I urge you to draw your own conclusions as to their meaning. So a lot of this is from a slide presentation. We don't have the slides, obviously. But I'll go ahead and I'll read his explanations. And I already know most of the material on here, and so I should be able to explain it. Conan Melody, a Soviet citizen born in 1922, was sent to California to live with his aunt at age 7. After attending 9 years of school in the U.S. and learning English, he returned to the Soviet Union, received a commission in the Soviet Navy, and was trained in espionage. In 1954, he was sent to Canada, where he assumed the identity of a deceased Canadian, one Gordon Lonsdale. A year later, he was in England posing as a British businessman, but his real purpose was spying out British defense secrets. In 1961, Lonsdale and 4 members of his spy ring were discovered, arrested, and convicted in London's Old Bailey Court. He was sentenced to 25 years in prison, but eventually was exchanged for British agent Greville Wynne. If the KGB can begin creating spies as teenagers, it is certainly a certainty that the United States Intelligence Service can do the same. Considerable evidence shows 2 people were using the name Lee Harvey Oswald as teenagers, years before the Kennedy assassination. Many people worked with, befriended, served in the Marines, or went to school with Lee Oswald at times and places that conflict with the official Warren Commission chronology of his life. This February 1958 photograph is from Robert Oswald's book Lee, this photo does not look like the Lee Oswald we're familiar with. And furthermore, in February 58, Lee was supposed to be in the Philippines, not hunting in Texas. So this photograph, it's in my new book. It's pretty widely, well, not too widely spread, but it's spread enough. It shows Lee holding a rifle, wearing like a tan jacket, and he's got a military kind of style haircut, and he's a very tall, thick individual. Robert Oswald changed the date of that photograph multiple times. Multiple times. First he said February 58, then he said December 58, and then he said when Lee got out of the Marines in September of 59. Now I'm pretty sure it can't be September 59 because Lee's hair hasn't grown long enough from the photograph of him on this passport. So we can scratch that. Was it December of 58? Well, it could have been because Lee gets back from Atsugi December the 22nd. He takes 2 weeks leave to Fort Worth. So it could have been taken there. But when you compare the photographs of Oswald around that time to the photograph of Oswald allegedly at the Mercer farm, again, the timing is not right. And it most certainly could not have been February of 58 at all. Because in February of 58, Oswald was just getting to Atsugi. He got there in November. He was it August? No, he got there in September. But it doesn't make any sense for it to have been February 58. And he was way younger looking. He matured a lot in the last year and a half that he was in the Marines. So the pictures of him going in the Marines and the pictures of him taken by Robert, clearly the same person, but much, much, much more matured. So, but yeah, we don't know when the fuck that photo was taken. I believe it was sometime in 1959. I don't know when it could have been taken. He took a couple leaves after he got back. He allegedly went to Tijuana a couple times, but who the hell knows? He could have taken any weekend he could have hopped to Fort Worth. Any weekend. So we'll never know. But I'm confident that photo was from 59. All right. Slide 2, Arlington Heights, Lee Harvey Oswald holding a .22 rifle. Philippines. When Robert Oswald's 1958 photo, the one in the middle, is compared with photos of Lee taken in 1956 in Fort Worth and 1958 in the Philippines, the differences are very noticeable. Yes. So the photographs he's referring to here are the two photographs he's referring to are the one that Robert took allegedly before Oswald went into the Marines. But that photograph doesn't look anything like the photograph of Oswald taken by the Marines in October? It had to have been like the last week of October 1956. And then the 1958 Philippines photo, all right, so that photograph is most certainly Harvey Oswald. He looks quite different than he does from any other pictures, except for the picture of him in platoon, 2060? Other than that photograph that we have from Lee in his platoon 2060, those two pictures look alike, but they don't look like anybody else. I don't know. I don't even want to comment. I already went through all the military stuff, and I understand it as well as anyone can understand it, and it still doesn't make fucking sense. So, all right, slide 2, Arlington Heights, Lee Harvey Oswald holding a .22 rifle, Philippines. Yeah, that's the one we just talked about. Slide 3, Lee Harvey Oswald holding a .22, and Lee Harvey Oswald holding Kathy. That's the photo I was just talking about. That photograph of him holding Kathy looks nothing like any other photo of him at all. Slide 4, Lee Harvey Oswald holding Kathy, and the passport photo on the left is Lee's passport photo taken September 4th. It wasn't the 4th, it was the 10th. And it was in Los Angeles, California. The photo on the right was taken by Robert Oswald 10 days later in Texas. They do not look like the same person. Okay, so I don't know what picture he's talking about. The next one was taken by Robert Oswald 10 days later in Texas. I don't know what picture he's talking about. Because if he's talking about the picture at the Mercer farm, then he's giving two different sets of dates for that same photo, which is not good. Can't do that. And I do think those look like the same person, by the way. Slide 5, 11/1/59 Star Telegram photo. This photo appears in the Fort Worth Star Telegram November 1st, 59. They still have the original photo. This certainly does not look like the Lee Oswald we are familiar with. That's correct. It does not. The hairline is what gets me. And the thing that throws me off is I just found a picture from Russia that looks like the real Lee Oswald, which doesn't make any sense to me. But I haven't gotten to Oswald in Russia yet, so we'll cross that bridge when we get there. The differences in these photos concern me. I started to separate documents, testimony, and photographs of Lee Oswald as though I were dealing with two people. Warren Commission records, 1952-53 in New York. Yeah, this is a very, very... so first off, we have a lot of missing documents. There's so much conflicting information that if we have one piece of a document or one set of documents that's part of a larger set, you can rest assured that if there's another set of documents that's sort of like that, that's also missing, in this case, they don't necessarily go together, which is interesting because the one thing it shows you is that there's basically what I call potholes. There's missing documents everywhere. If you were to try to put everything into like a puzzle, you'd be missing 3/4 of it, if not more. Or God, I'd say even more than that. 80%, 90% of Oswald's life is what we're missing. And that pertains to school records particularly. So August of 52, Marguerite and Lee arrive in New York, stay at John Pick's at 325 East 92nd. September 8th, 52, Trinity Lutheran Evangelical, 7th grade, and he has here 9 days. But thanks to researcher Diana Thomas, we now know that Oswald never went to Trinity, never showed up. John Hanna, the pastor there who knew the principal at the time, who was Lawrence Wench, he confirmed Oswald never showed up at the school, ever. So we have a forged record showing that he was there. And why did they do that? Probably because Oswald was elsewhere. Was he at Stripling? I don't think he was at Stripling. I think he was at a school in Manhattan. So, but Robert Oswald testified he was at Stripling at that time, which, I mean, it's possible, but that means he would have been at Stripling 2 separate times, like 2.5 years apart, or maybe even 3 years apart. September 8th, Trinity Lutheran. September 30th, PS 117. He was there for 15 days. I think he's there a little longer than that. January 16th, 53, he leaves PS 117. He fails to enroll at PS 44. March 23rd, 53, first attends PS 44. April 16th of 53, court hearing sent to Youth House until May 7th. These dates are all jacked up because Milton Kurian swears up and down he's very sure the date he met with Oswald was March 27th, which is 2 weeks before Oswald was ever allegedly picked up. But then again, I have a document from April the 15th that shows Oswald was in court on the 15th. We have multiple stories of Oswald having been taken from Marguerite in court, and we have another story of the cops coming to his house and arresting him out of his apartment. Which one is correct? Both are probably correct. September 53, attends PS 44. January 11th, he moves to New Orleans. He goes to Beauregard. The Warren Commission provides a record of Lee's life through the 6th grade in Fort Worth in August 1952. Marguerite sold her house and drove with Lee to New York to be near her oldest son, John Pick. I think there's more to that story. Lee attended junior high school in New York for a year and a half, then moved to New Orleans, where he attended Beauregard Junior High School for a year and a half. That's about right. All of his junior high school years were spent in either New York or New Orleans, so says the Warren Commission. All right, now he has slides of Robert and Marguerite's statements, Robert Oswald testimony. But Robert Oswald told the Warren Commission that Lee attended Stripling Junior High School in Fort Worth in the fall of 1952, not junior high in New York. When Warren Commission Attorney Jenner asked Robert if Lee had entered W.C. Stripling as a 7th grader, Robert replied, yes, sir, junior high school. When Marguerite was interviewed by Mr. Pierre, she stated, yes, when we lived in Fort Worth, he went to school there up until the 8th grade, which is junior high. But that's wrong. 7th grade is junior high. See, Marguerite is fucking stupid because it's not Marguerite. The Marguerite who testified to everything is not Marguerite. And dollars to donuts, that woman is Amanthe Voitier. I'll get into her in detail on a show. I need to gather a lot more data on her because there's nothing out there on her. Nothing. Robert and Marguerite said he went to junior high in Fort Worth, but New York records show Lee entered 7th grade in junior high in New York. Either Marguerite and Robert are both wrong, or we begin to see evidence that two people are using the name of Lee Harvey Oswald. Marguerite told the Warren Commission that she had moved to New York to be near her oldest son, John Pick. Yet Pick told the Warren Commission that neither he nor Robert could get along with Marguerite. They both joined the service as soon as they could get away from her. Why then did Marguerite move to New York? Yeah, see, there's way more to it. I think it has more to do with her Navy stuff. While in New York, Mrs. Oswald, although allegedly quite poor, hired a housekeeper for 3 days a week. Mrs. Oswald told her housekeeper, Louise Robertson, she'd brought Lee to New York to have mental tests done at the Jacobi Hospital. Now, the Jacobi Hospital I've never looked into. Whether or not Lee was connected to that, I don't know, don't care. What I do want to know is whether or not they were the type of things going on at Jacobi Hospital that could indicate Lee was brought there for mental tests, right? So was Jacobi even doing mental tests, and why were they doing mental tests, and was it a mental hospital, right? So I think these questions need to be asked and answered. Marguerite was asked about this by the Warren Commission Attorney Rankin. Mr. Rankin said, before you left New York, did you ever tell anybody that you took Lee Oswald to New York so he could have mental tests done at Jacobi Hospital? No, sir, never. My child was a normal child, and while in New York, I explained to you he had a dog with puppies, and that's false. He had a bicycle. There was nothing abnormal about Lee. So the dog with puppies, I don't know about what she's talking about. The only dog that Lee had was Blackie, and that was in the late 40s and early 50s, and he didn't have a dog in New York. The point was never again raised by the Warren Commission. Handwritten New York school records for Lee Oswald found in the Warren Commission volumes are incomplete, contradictory, and may well be forgeries. Warren Commission records tell us that Oswald first entered Trinity Evangelical School in the Bronx in September 1952, but John Pick told the FBI Lee first attended a school 2 blocks from his apartment. That is correct. That's what John Pick told the FBI and is in the Warren Commission testimony. Pick said he knew Lee attended this school because he and Lee had discussed this school, yet there is no record of Lee's attendance at any school near the Pick's apartment. So in the area that he described, I found 4 schools, but none of them were on the intersection that he said they were. They were like blocks away. So I don't know. It might have been one of those 4. I couldn't confirm anything, so I just kind of dropped the whole issue. It's completely unverifiable. From September 1952 through January 1953, Lee attended only 24 days of school. His failure to attend regular school caused a truancy hearing to be conducted by the Board of Education in January. Neither Lee nor Marguerite attended. Marguerite and Lee had recently moved to the Public School 44 district, where Lee failed to register or attend school. On April 16, 1953, a court hearing was held. The judge found that Lee had attended only 24 days of school. See, that's false. That's again false. That is again false. It did not. The court hearing did not happen on April 16th. April 16th was the date that Oswald was allegedly picked up at his apartment in the Bronx by Felicia Schwitzer and her burglary detective squad. The 16th, but see, I have a document that says that Lee was in court on the 15th. So Lee couldn't have been in court on the 15th and then arrested on the 16th. But then I have a document that says Lee was admitted on April 10th. And then we have the testimony of Milton Kurian, who said he met with Oswald on March 27th. So as you can see, all of these dates are suspect. The judge found that Lee had only attended 24 days of school in New York since entering the 7th grade the previous September. Lee Oswald was remanded to the youth house until May 7th for truancy. Yet this Warren Commission Exhibit 1374 shows him attending 109 days of school during the 1953 spring semester. At the same time, he's supposed to be truant and placed in the youth house. Both of these documents are Warren Commission records. Which are we to believe? Did he attend 24 days of school and wind up in the youth house, or did he attend 109 days of school in the 7th grade? Most students who attend only 24 days of school during the 7th grade, or any grade for that matter, are required to repeat that grade year. You would expect, therefore, Lee to re-enter the 7th grade that following September. Yet when Assistant FBI Director John Malone reviewed the New York court file on Oswald after the assassination, he filed an 8-page report and stated that when Lee Oswald left Youth House on May 7th, 1953, he entered PS 44 in the 9th grade. 9th grade, when Lee should have been in the 7th grade. A mistake? Perhaps. But consider Marguerite Oswald's interview with Lee's probation officer John Caro on September 24th, 1953. When Caro reminded her that Lee was still under court supervision, she told Caro that Lee no longer needed court supervision. He was doing much better and had just been elected president of his 9th grade class. 2 references to the 9th grade, one by Marguerite Oswald, the other by Assistant FBI Director John Malone, who obtained his information from Judge Florence Kelly's court file. Okay, so Judge Florence Kelly, she came in after the fact. She didn't deal with Oswald back in the day. She was the judge who they went to get the documents from before. So that's the reference to her. It should be easy to find out what grade Lee was in 1953. The Warren Commission provided us with comprehensive grade school records that include his report cards, student lists, enrollment forms, interviews of teachers, students, and neighbors. Yet when we try to find similar information for his junior high school attendance in New York, we find almost nothing. No report cards, no student lists, no enrollment forms, no interviews of teachers, students, or neighbors. These items are conspicuously missing from the volumes. The only New York school records provided by the Commission are handwritten, nearly illegible, and full of inconsistencies. Remember, these are records that show Lee attended 109 days during his 7th grade year, while according to court records, he attended only 24 days of school and was placed in the youth house. When he leaves the youth house, he is, according to Marguerite and Assistant FBI Director Malone, now in the 9th grade. Confusing, isn't it? I'm laughing because, yeah, it is confusing, and that's basically how I have to leave things in my newest book. I'm like, yeah, this doesn't make any sense, does it? And there you go. And so whenever I find things don't make sense like this, it's because there's a completely missing dimension. There's a whole other factor that we don't know about that is what, it's like being 2-dimensional looking at a 3-dimensional object kind of thing, right? We're missing a whole dimension of information. We have one and only one photo of Lee during the year and a half he was in New York. This photo was supposedly taken by Robert Oswald in the summer of 1953. He's talking about the Bronx Zoo photo. When this photo, Warren Commission Exhibit 2893, was shown to John Pick during his Warren Commission testimony, he replied, "Sir, from that picture, I could not recognize that is Lee Harvey Oswald." Jenner asked, "That fellow shown here doesn't look like you recall he looked in 1952 and 53 when you saw him in New York City." And Pick replied, "No, sir." It's actually not true that there's only one picture. There's 2 pictures. And Armstrong didn't sort this out either, but there's a picture that Armstrong had labeled like 1951 or 52. But when you look at the chronological school records, the photographic school records, you can clearly tell which photos are in order because Oswald's getting older, right? And so there is another photo. It's a school photo, and it's after the graduation from Ridgelea, and it's from before Beauregard, which means it was taken in New York, right? Which means it was taken in 1953 at the same time around that this photo at the Bronx Zoo picture was taken. And so those 2 pictures I have compared in my new book, Lee Harvey Oswald in Black and White, Volume 1. And you can clearly see it's not the same kid, albeit the picture on the right is a little fuzzy. Not much you can do about that. But it's clearly not the same kid. But yeah, I just wanted to clarify that additional photo does exist from 1953. Because the next photo from 54 is from Beauregard. John Pick now lives in Lynn Haven, Florida. When I asked him about the photo, Pick stated that he gave his testimony to the Warren Commission in 1964. He will stand by that testimony and has nothing further to say. In trying to verify Oswald's school life in New York, we're left with a contradictory school transcript. No interviews of students, teachers, or friends. An FBI report that places him in the 9th grade instead of the 7th grade, and one questionable photo. Consider this. If Lee Oswald was in the 9th grade in the fall of 1953 in New York, then when he left New York in January 1954, he was still in the 9th grade. When he left New York, where did he go? The Warren Commission says he moved to New Orleans. Lee Oswald said in a 1959 interview, slide 13, "We moved from New York to Fort Worth." Lee also filled out a personal history while in Russia that said he lived in Fort Worth from 54 to 56. Stanley Nyberg, who was Mrs. Oswald's supervisor at the King Candy Company in Fort Worth in 1958, said she came here with her children from New York and had good references. These documents suggest that Oswald moved from New York to Fort Worth. Okay, but see, here he's contradicting himself. And I don't know why he doesn't realize it. You see, the coming from New York to Fort Worth would have happened in January of 1954. But it wouldn't have happened in January of 54. Because one of the Oswalds ended up in North Dakota, right? We'll talk about that another time. I don't think he talked. I think he might mention this here. But I am 100% believer Harvey Oswald went to North Dakota for the summer after that photo at the Bronx Zoo was taken, because he never went back to school the next year. And then the real Oswald continued on going to school where he had the good attendance record, right? But the other Oswald is the one they're still chasing. Therefore, when he's talking about Miss Oswald moved from New York to Fort Worth, that doesn't make any sense at all. Because in January of 54, Harvey Oswald, who was in North Dakota, who obviously didn't go from New York to Fort Worth, if he went to North Dakota, he went from New York to North Dakota to New Orleans by January of 54, where he starts at Beauregard, and he's in Myra DeRusse LaRue's class, homeroom class, right, where she brings him home to Exchange Place. That's the series of events that I believe happened. But the weird thing is that Lee Oswald and his mother leave from New York January 10th or 11th, 54, and they fucking disappear. They disappear. There's no record of them until May or June, late May or early June of 1954, when they move into Myrtle Evans' place, and that's her testimony. She also said that they came to New Orleans from either San Antonio or Fort Worth, right? So I don't understand why Armstrong is conflating these things that shouldn't be conflated, because he fucking is. The day after the assassination, Mr. Frank Coodlady, former assistant principal of Stripling Junior High in Fort Worth, was told by his boss, Weldon Lucas, to meet the FBI at Stripling and give them Oswald's Stripling records. Frank looked through Oswald's file and noted that Oswald had attended not quite a semester in the 9th grade. That's correct. Frank retired last year as superintendent of schools in Waco, Texas. He did not remember the year Oswald had attended Stripling, but one Stripling student, Fran Schubert, says it was either 1954 or 1955. Fran remembers Oswald being a grade or two ahead of her. She remembered watching Oswald walk home during lunch periods and discussing him with her girlfriends. Doug Gann of Fort Worth remembered Oswald in his gym class. Interestingly, Paul Gregory, Oswald's friend and Marina's interpreter in 1963, also attended Stripling Junior High in 1954. His father, Peter Paul Gregory, was a prominent member of the Russian community in Dallas. Mr. Coodlady's story raised several questions. How did the FBI know Oswald attended Stripling? Why were two agents sent within hours of the assassination to pick up records at a school that Oswald was not supposed to have attended? What happened to these records? The FBI's expediency in obtaining those records, hiding those records from the public, and not making them available to the Warren Commission means that someone in a high position at the FBI knew about the existence of two Lee Harvey Oswalds. When Lee left New York and moved to Fort Worth and attended Stripling in January 1954, he created the 9th grade record that Mr. Coodlady gave to the FBI. No, that's wrong. Because Harvey Oswald is the one who went to Beauregard in January of 54. Lee is in the wind. He's missing. Okay? Did he go to Stripling in January 54? No, he did not. We don't know where he is. And remember, if you have two of them going to school, one of them doesn't necessarily have to go to school, because the record will carry over for both of them, right? So no, Lee doesn't show up in New Orleans till May or June. He doesn't go to Beauregard till the following semester. It is after that Harvey and his mother leave 126 Exchange Place and then bounce in October of 1954 to Fort Worth, where he then attends Stripling, where Franchetta Schubert sees him. She remembers it was that time of year because of the he was wearing a brown leather jacket and all his friends had black leather jackets. So that is 100% what Armstrong himself researched, and I don't understand how he doesn't seem to be able to chronologize his own research in this instance. I just don't get it. His book didn't come out for a couple years, so maybe this is just premature in his work. Myrtle Evans said they moved to New Orleans from Texas. Myrtle had known Marguerite for 20 years and was perhaps Marguerite's best friend. When Marguerite returned to New Orleans, Myrtle Evans rented her an apartment on St. Mary Street. She told the Warren Commission Attorney Jenner Marguerite did not move here from New York. She moved here from Texas. Jenner again asked her about Marguerite moving from New York to New Orleans. Mrs. Evans said, "I told you they came here from Texas, not New York." That's not what she said. That is not the tone that she used, and I don't know why he's kind of twisting that either. Remember Robert Oswald telling the Warren Commission when Lee finished grade school, he next attended W.C. Stripling Junior High in Fort Worth? And remember Marguerite Oswald saying that Lee had attended junior high in Fort Worth until the 8th grade? These statements, plus Myrtle Evans' testimony that Marguerite had moved to New Orleans from Fort Worth, suggest that one Lee Oswald completed grade school in Fort Worth, attended his 7th grade year at Stripling in Fort Worth, then moved to New Orleans. He would then be ready to enter the 8th grade in New Orleans. So what do New Orleans school records tell us? Now, that whole last paragraph is not accurate at all. Franchetta Schubert told him it was the 54-55 school year, and it was in the fall because it was cold. So I don't know what he's trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. Slide 16. Warren Commission Exhibit 1413 shows that Oswald's attendance at Beauregard Junior High in New Orleans. The top line, highlighted in yellow, shows his grade and attendance during the first half of his 8th grade year. He attended 89 days, with one absence beginning in September 1953. But remember Marguerite telling John Caro that Lee had been elected president of his 9th grade class at Public School 44 in New York. That was on September 24th, 1953. Okay, I think I understand why she said 9th, because she just didn't know. She got it wrong. Even though it should have been 8th grade, and it wasn't that Lee that got elected class president. It was the other Lee Oswald. It wasn't Harvey Oswald. And this is Marguerite, the fake Marguerite, who's talking, right? So she's reading from a script or attempting to remember a script, because that's not what really happened. That's why she's making the mistake. Slide 17. Warren Commission 1413, New York and Beauregard school records. Here are 2 Warren Commission exhibits. The top one shows Lee Oswald's attendance, Beauregard for 89 days during the fall term in 53 in New Orleans. The other shows he attended 62 days of school during the fall term of 53 in New York. If both documents are correct, you have 2 Lee Oswalds, one in New York, another in New Orleans in the fall of 53. Okay, so this is where I blatantly disagree with him. The information that he's getting is coming from the cumulative school record versus the New York school record. Right. And so we've already seen evidence that the cumulative school record and the New York school records have been tampered with. Right. So he's attempting to use a document he's already admitted was tampered with as a basis for coming to this conclusion. You can't do that either. Not that it's not a possibility, but you can't do that from a logic perspective. Yeah, I disagree with that entirely. There's not enough substantiation. I would say that we possibly don't know, but Oswald doesn't appear at Beauregard till January. The school records say that, and Myra DeRusse LaRue says that. We have witness testimony to that. There's no witness testimony and no documents suggesting he was there earlier, except for what Armstrong's pointing out, which I've already said comes from a document that we already know has been tampered with. Right? So what are we left with? J. Edgar Hoover was aware of the possibility of 2 Lee Oswalds. He wrote this memo suggesting that an imposter may be using Oswald's birth certificate in June of 1960. Okay, so that is not really accurate either. I've explained this before. I feel like a broken record at this point. So the document that everyone likes to point to that says that someone could have been using his birth certificate is not because they had information that there was another duplicate Oswald who was using his birth certificate. The reason for that memo was because they were keeping tabs on Oswald. They knew exactly where he was all the time, regardless of what they tell us, when he was in the Soviet Union. While he's in the Soviet Union, he falls off the grid for over a month. They do not have any information on where he is. Okay? They were calculating the worst case scenario. Worst case scenario is somebody took out Oswald and we might expect them to be using his birth certificate. That was their state of mind. So when you read through that document again, keep in mind, they were thinking worst case scenario, Oswald's off the grid. We know he has a birth certificate with him. Worst case scenario is somebody is now impersonating Oswald and using his birth certificate. That was their perspective. It had nothing to do with their knowledge of a duplicate at all. That probably is compartmentalized elsewhere. In early 64, Warren Commission member Richard Russell asked Army Intelligence Colonel Philip James Corso of Roswell fame to quietly conduct an investigation into the Oswald matter. Corso reported to Senator Russell that there had been 2 United States passports issued to Lee Harvey Oswald, and they'd been used by 2 different men. He obtained this information from the head of the U.S. Passport Office, Francis Knight. He also reported to Senator Russell that there were 2 birth certificates in the name of Lee Harvey Oswald, and they had been used by 2 different people. He obtained this information from William Sullivan, head of FBI's Domestic Intelligence Division. Corso said he and Senator Russell concluded the assassination had been a conspiracy, and Senator Russell thereafter stopped going to Warren Commission meetings. I checked to see how many sessions had been attended by each member. Senator Russell attended the least number of meetings. Lee Oswald and Ed Voebel at Beauregard Junior High. In 1955, Ed Voebel witnessed Robin Riley punch Lee Oswald in the mouth. That's another error. It wasn't Robin Riley. It was Johnny Newmeyer. Voebel got some ice for Oswald, attempted to patch him up, and became friendly with him. He told the Warren Commission Oswald's lip was cut and his tooth was knocked out. Oswald and Voebel became good friends. Voebel visited Oswald at his Exchange Place address after his music lessons around the corner. Voebel told the FBI that reports of Oswald's reading communistic literature at that time were a bunch of hogwash. That's the real Lee Oswald he was talking about. Lee Harvey Oswald English class. Voebel took this photograph of Oswald in Helen DeFore's English class. Oswald clearly appears to have a missing front tooth in this photo. This Lee Oswald, the one that Ed Voebel befriended, was the one whom moved from Fort Worth to New Orleans. In 1981, Oswald's body was exhumed, autopsied, and photographed. These slides are from that exhumation and were provided by Marina Oswald Porter. Dr. Linda Norton showed that Oswald's marine dental record matched the teeth of the exhumed body. Neither record nor x-rays showed any broken or missing teeth. If Oswald had a front tooth knocked out in 1955, there's only one way to explain the exhumed body of Lee Harvey Oswald having unbroken natural teeth in 1981. The exhumed body was a different Lee Oswald. The exhumed body was the Oswald who had moved from New York to Fort Worth, the person who worked at Fister's in 1958 with McBride, the person who defected to Russia, and the person who was killed by Jack Ruby. Okay, so I disagree with some of this here. The exhumed body was a different Lee Oswald. Yeah, it was Harvey Oswald, just like he explains in his book. The exhumed body was the Oswald who had moved from New York to Fort Worth. No, because that never happened. We don't have any information that actually happened. And the exhumed body was definitely not, if that was the case, the exhumed body was not the one who moved from New York to Fort Worth. It was Harvey Oswald who went to Beauregard in January of 54. See, he can't even keep his own research straight, which is fucking pissing me off. So yeah, because it was Lee Oswald who was in the wind until May or June of 54, right? And they're the one who would have come directly from Fort Worth, not Harvey. You see, he kind of interchanges it when it's convenient for him, but it's not convenient. He just didn't understand the ultimate timeline. He didn't even seem to try to account for the fact that they were gone till May or June. But yeah, that's what I disagree with. And the Fister stuff I disagree with also because at this point in time, I can put both Oswalds in the Far East, in the Philippines and Atsugi. Both of them. And the person identified as Marguerite Oswald, I think he's going to talk about this coming up, but Palmer McBride identifies a photograph of a woman shown to him by John Armstrong. He identifies it as Marguerite Oswald that he met. But the woman in the picture is clearly Lillian Moret, 100%. So that means it was most likely her son, John Marshall Moret, who was impersonating Oswald at the Fister Dental Lab. And why? I have no idea. Maybe a practice run. Who the fuck knows? This is an intelligence family, 100%. So yeah, that's where I disagree with there. Warren Commission records: Lee Oswald's employment in New Orleans, Dolly Shoe Company, first quarter. 1955, September-October, Warren Easton High School. 1955, Gerard Toujague Inc. to November 10th, January 14th, 56. 1956, J.R. Michelle's 2 weeks, no beginning or end. And 1956, Fister Dental Lab, a few months. In 1956, July, moved to Fort Worth, Texas. Yeah, I disagree with that entirely. This slide shows the Warren Commission version of Oswald's employment in New Orleans, but FBI interviews with Oswald co-workers that were not included in the Warren Commission volumes tell a very different story. And understanding of his employment reveals that not one, but two different people, both named Lee Harvey Oswald, worked at these companies. The Warren Commission tells us Lee's first job was at the Dolly Shoe Company during the spring of 1955. He entered Warren Easton High School in New Orleans the fall and dropped out a month and a half later. I disagree with that entirely also. He then worked for Toujague's, J.R. Michelle's, and the Fister Dental Laboratory. But available evidence indicates Oswald may have worked at Toujague's as early as July 1955 and as late as July of 1956. This is very important. Actually, it's October 56, because it was Frank DiBenedetto who told Armstrong again that Lee had worked there for him until he left for the Marines in October of 56. So that's very important. Robert Oswald told the Warren Commission that he got out of the Marines in July of 55, purchased a 1951 Chevrolet, and drove to New Orleans, where he stayed with Marguerite and Lee for a week before returning to Fort Worth. During his brief stay, Robert helped buy a Civil Air Patrol uniform for Lee from an Army supply store. Lee had joined the Civil Air Patrol on July 27th. Robert told the Warren Commission that during his one-week stay, Lee was working for an export firm there in New Orleans, and that was in July of 55. The export firm was Gerard F. Tujeg, Inc. Frank DiBenedetto, Oswald's supervisor, remembered him as a model employee who was very dependable and about 5'10 to 5'11 inches tall, a little taller than himself. 5 months earlier, Oswald had listed his height as 5'5" on a Beauregard Junior High personal history form. Frank told the HSCA Oswald had worked for Tujeg's for a year to a year and a half. Gloria Callahan, a secretary at Tujeg's, remembers Oswald working there as late as April of 1956, when she took leave of absence to have her first child. Frank did not remember the month that Oswald had quit, but did remember that Oswald said he was quitting in order to join the Marines. Oswald left New Orleans in July of 56, moved to Fort Worth, and joined the Marines in October. Frank and Gloria's memory of when and how long Oswald worked at Tujeg's differs significantly from Warren Commission records. Those records show Oswald worked at Tujeg's only 2 months, November 10th, 55 through January 14th, 56, but there's no documentation to verify those dates. The Warren Commission's only evidence of Oswald's length of employment at this company are Mr. Tujeg's handwritten payroll records. Employee Jimmy Hudnell remembers gathering up Oswald's payroll records, time cards, canceled payroll checks, and giving them to Mr. Tujeg shortly after the assassination. What happened to those records, the hard evidence, the documents that any accountant or IRS agent might ask to see. The evidence that could prove conclusively the beginning and end dates of Oswald's employment at Tujeg's. You see, if Oswald worked at Tujeg's from July 55 until the summer of 56, he could not have attended Warren Easton High School in October, worked at J.R. Michel's in January, or worked at Fister's for a few months during the spring of 56. The Warren Commission never interviewed a single employee of Tujeg's. They relied only on handwritten records provided by Gerard Tujeg, records that cannot be audited or verified. Okay, so I completely disagree with Armstrong again here. So we have a document, the transfer form, because Oswald will start at Arlington Heights High School in September 56. He goes for like 3 weeks and drops out in October of 56. However, by the time the records come over from Warren Easton, the Warren Easton records, we're told there are no grades. But the documentation, when it goes over, it says Oswald attended from September of 1955 until October the 12th of 1956, right? So when they get it, they're like, oh, this must just be a mistake, and they changed 56 to 55. The idea that Oswald went to Warren Easton for over a year is backed up by the notion that Oswald went on the Latin American program on WDSU when he did his interviews. And he said that he went to Warren Easton for over a year. But the kicker is that it couldn't have been that Oswald that went to Warren Easton. That had to have been just part of the script that he was handed. Because he, I can say with near certainty, was already in Fort Worth at that time. They dipped to Fort Worth early, way sooner than we're told. So I'm getting off track here. They should have Mr. Tujeg, like Oswald, was quite interested in Cuban affairs. When Guy Bannister incorporated the Friends of Democratic Cuba, Tujeg was listed as vice president. Guy Bannister was on the board of directors. Bannister, Ferry, Tujeg, Gordon Novell, Clay Shaw, 544 Camp Street, Friends of Democratic Cuba, Anti-Communist League of the Caribbean, and Lee Harvey Oswald. His employment at Gerard F. Tujeg, Inc. provided a friendly safe haven for young Oswald. The Warren Commission tells us Oswald went to work for the J.R. Michel's company in January 1956 for 2 weeks, but remember Gloria Callahan telling us that Oswald was working at Tujeg's until May of 56, when she took maternity leave. Oswald may have worked at J.R. Michel's, but it was not the same Oswald that worked at Tujeg's at the same time. When I mentioned to Frank DiBenedetto, Oswald's supervisors at Two Jakes, that Oswald had worked at J.R. Michel's, Frank said he was sure Oswald had not worked there. Nick's office was one floor below his office. He and Nick spent a great amount of time together at each other's offices. They saw each other daily, had lunch often, and were good friends. Frank said if Oswald had worked there, I would have known about it. Lee Oswald probably worked at J.R. Michel's, but not the Oswald Frank DiBenedetto and Gloria Callahan knew. The Warren Commission report tells us that after quitting J.R. Michel's, Oswald worked several months thereafter for Fister Dental Lab. Linda Faircloth, current president of Fister Dental Lab, was aware that Oswald had worked at Fister's. She had discussed the matter with the former owners and partners of Fister. They told her that following the assassination, the FBI took the four Fister partners to separate rooms to be questioned. They were told not to discuss the Oswald matter amongst themselves or with anyone. The FBI took all employment records, payroll records, quarterly tax forms, canceled checks, employment applications, W-2 forms, all hard evidence pertaining to Oswald. These items have disappeared. Not a single Fister employee or partner testified before the commission. Nowhere in the 26 volumes is there one shred of evidence as to Oswald's beginning and ending dates of employment at Fister's. Absolutely nothing. Why? The screen on the right shows a testimony of Fister employee Palmer McBride. The left screen shows Oswald's military records. Airman Second Class Palmer McBride told the FBI he worked with Oswald from the fall of 57 to the summer of 58 at the Fister Dental Lab in New Orleans. Warren Commission records show him to be in the Marines, in Japan at that time. Someone is lying. McBride told me he met Oswald in the fall of 57. They worked together every day, discussed the October 4th, 57 Sputnik space launch, visited each other's homes, and attended the Boris Godunov Opera. Without telling McBride, I obtained a brochure from the New Orleans Historical Collection. Boris Godunov played only 2 days in New Orleans during the 1950s on October 10th and 12th, 1957. In early 1958, he took Oswald to a meeting of the New Orleans Amateur Astronomy Association at the home of Walter Gehrke. Gehrke told the FBI that none of the meetings of the association were held in his home until 1958. Therefore, McBride and Oswald could only have attended meetings at Gehrke's home in January 58 or later. McBride visited Oswald's room at the Hotel Senator, across the street from where they worked. He worked daily with Oswald till July of 58 when he quit to join the Air Force Reserves. At that time, according to the Warren Commission, Oswald was supposed to be in Japan in the military prison. The Warren Commission became aware of the Fister Dental Laboratory only through McBride's statements to the FBI, but McBride was never questioned by the Warren Commission. Why not? Because McBride would have told them that he and Oswald had worked at Fister's in 1957 and 1958, when Oswald was supposed to be in Japan. Of the 8 individuals mentioned in McBride's FBI statement, only one was interviewed by the Warren Commission. That person was William Wolfe Jr., a friend of McBride's who had met Oswald briefly. Warren Commission attorney Liebler questioned Mr. Wolfe. Liebler did not give Mr. Wolfe any chance to comment about the year he met Lee Oswald. In his opening statement to Wolfe, Liebler said, "We want to inquire of you concerning possible knowledge that you have Lee Harvey Oswald during the time that he lived in New Orleans during the period of 1954 to 55. A very clever statement by an attorney who knew exactly what he was doing. Notice how Liebler directs his witnesses' attention to 1954 and 1955. He avoided any reference to Lee Oswald in New Orleans in 57 and 58. Liebler did his part to avoid dealing with Oswald in New Orleans in 1957 and 1958. The FBI did its part as well. McBride visited Oswald's room at the Hotel Senator in 1958, where he was introduced to Marguerite. But the FBI interviewed only those employees who had worked at the hotel prior to 1956, thereby avoiding employees who had worked at the hotel in 57 and 58 who could have remembered Oswald. They reviewed hotel registration cards for the year 1956, again avoiding 1957 and 1958. The search for Oswald at the Hotel Senator was deliberately shifted from 1958 to prior to 1956. McBride's statement presented a serious problem, one they could not ignore. Oswald in New Orleans in 1957 and 1958 was unexplainable. They needed evidence that could place Oswald in New Orleans in 1956 before he entered the Marines, but they had none. Let me take you now to the afternoon of November 22nd, 1963, just after the assassination. On November 22nd and 23rd, 1963, the Dallas Police Department searched Oswald's rooming house once and the Payne residence twice. From those 3 searches, Oswald's possessions were secured. 5 rolls of film were used to photograph 427 items of evidence. On November 26th, Dallas police officers English and Hill took these items and 5 rolls of undeveloped film to Dallas FBI office. An FBI stenographer inventoried those items, which is now Warren Commission Exhibit 2113. FBI agent Warren DeBreeze took the 427 items and the film to FBI headquarters in Washington the next day. The Dallas police requested the FBI to develop their 5 rolls of film and return 3 photographs of each items for their files. 5 days later, the FBI returned 2 rolls of undeveloped film to the Dallas police and 2 rolls to the Secret Service. Of the roll the Secret Service received, the missing photos on the box. The following day, Chief Curry wrote his letter to the Dallas FBI office informing them that items 164 through 360 were missing from their film. By comparing the photographed items on the 2 rolls of film with the FBI inventory list of November 26th, we find 265 items missing. The FBI did not want the missing photographs returned to Dallas or made public, but they still had a problem. Chief Curry was asking about the missing photographs. The FBI had control of the original missing photos. Some of Oswald's possessions were altered and rephotographed by the FBI. These FBI photographs were then substituted for the original photos and returned to Dallas. By altering some of Oswald's possessions and withholding certain key items, the FBI was able to keep the public from learning the truth about critical parts of Lee Harvey Oswald's life. One key item was altered. That's 168, the Fister W-2 tax withholding statement for Lee Harvey Oswald. The original was delivered to the FBI on November 26th. This photograph of the Fister W-2 form was returned to Dallas in 1964. It is allegedly for the year 1956. However, you need only remember Palmer McBride's statement to realize there is a significant problem. Either this 1956 tax statement is a forgery, or McBride's statement of working with Oswald and Fister's in 1957 and 1958 is wrong. The IRS, in a letter to Linda Faircloth, President Fister's, stated that ID tax number 720444599, which appears on this 1956 statement, was not created until January 1964. This 1956 Fister W-2 form is a forgery, created in January of 1964, while in the custody of the FBI. This document was fabricated to show that Oswald worked at Fister's in 1956 rather than in 57 and 58. A prime example of falsified evidence and an attempted cover-up. Another example of cover-up involves a Minox camera found in Oswald's sea bag by Officer Gus Rose. This Minox camera was inventoried by the Dallas police. It also appears on the FBI inventory list of Oswald's possessions as item 375. This FBI list is Warren Commission Exhibit 375. Item 375 lists 8 items, including the Minox camera. Those 8 items were photographed together by the Dallas police. When the photograph of those 8 items was returned by the FBI on December 2nd, this is what it looked like. Only the pedometer is visible. The other items, including the Minox camera, had been faded out. The FBI did not want the Dallas police or the public to know that Oswald had owned a Minox camera. A few days later, an unknown FBI agent visited Dallas police officer Hill. He asked Hill to change the Dallas property list from a Minox camera to a Minox light meter. Officer Hill complied with the agent's request and wrote this memo relating to that incident. On January 31st, 64, FBI agent Bardwell Odom allegedly picked up a Minox camera from Ruth Payne. From that day forward, the FBI has maintained the Minox camera in question belonged to the Paynes. The FBI told us that Oswald never owned a Minox camera. However, unknown to the FBI, the Minox camera found in Oswald's sea bag was photographed by Dallas police on the afternoon of November 22nd, proof that we have been lied to by our government agencies. The FBI received Oswald's Minox camera from the Dallas police on November 26th. They tried to change its identity to a light meter a few days later, and beginning January 31st, 1964, they told us the camera belonged to the Paynes. Another example of the FBI tampering with evidence and helping to cover up key items of evidence. For those of you who have not yet seen a Minox camera, I brought mine. It looks nearly identical to this one in the photograph. These W-2 forms, the Minox camera, and other items of evidence were deliberately altered in order to mislead the public. One can only guess what might be found by closely comparing the inventory list of Oswald's possession with the other 265 missing photographs. We know now that Oswald was in New Orleans in 57 and 58 working with McBride. We know that the FBI and the Warren Commission attempted to conceal this from the public. But there was an Oswald in the Marines during 57 and 58, And there were dozens of FBI interviews with Marines who served with Oswald that were not included in the Warren Commission volumes, and for good reason. Here are a few. Michael DePadro worked each day with Oswald at El Toro. Oswald plotted aircraft positions on a glass partition in the radar room and was very good at drawing. He drew the squadron insignia. He said Oswald was left-handed. Several Marines remembered Lee being left-handed. Marguerite said Lee was left-handed. Lillian Moret remembered Lee using his left hand as a child, but the Oswald killed in Dallas was right-handed. That whole thing is false. Okay, neither one of them was left-fucking-handed. Period. DePadro also said Oswald had crew-cut blonde hair. Other Marines described Lee as having blonde hair. Mildred Sawyer, his only neighbor at Exchange Place in New Orleans, told the Warren Commission, "I remember the fact that he was a rather nice-looking little boy and he had blonde curly hair. The Oswald killed in Dallas had very dark hair." I don't agree with that either. He had sandy brown hair. Alan Feld and Oswald attended an A&P school in Jacksonville and then an aviation electronics school in Memphis, Tennessee in June and July of 1957. But Marine Corps records do not show Oswald ever attending A&P school, which is a mechanic school, nor attending any school in Memphis, Tennessee. Feld says he last saw Oswald in September in Memphis at a time Oswald was supposed to be in Japan. So the Alan Feld stuff, when you go back and look at the Marine diaries where it should say Alan Feld, it says Alexander Feld. I believe that's tampered. Just a couple weeks ago, I found another document from a Marine diary that said Alan R. Feld, just like it should. And now I can't find that goddamn document. It's driving me crazy. But I believe Alan Feld's statements are correct. I'll go into them another time. Daniel Powers was one of 6 Marines, including Oswald, who attended school together at Jacksonville and Biloxi in 57, and then according to the Marine orders, he showed the FBI this group, including Oswald, left by plane for El Toro on June 4th, 57. That's actually not true at all. The problem here is that Oswald was still in radar school at Biloxi on June 4th and did not graduate until June 18th, 2 weeks later. That's correct. The photo, we have the picture of June 18th with Powers in it. So Powers was just mistaken when he was interviewed for the Warren Commission. The thing to note about Powers is he was kind of along with Oswald with a bunch of other guys all the way over to Japan. And he ends up getting killed, shot in the right temple, and the gun was found in his left hand. So you tell me what happened there. Gerald Hansen was stationed at the Lake Mead Air Base in Nevada in December 58. He worked with a supply clerk who had the name of Benjamin stenciled on his utility shirt. When Captain Munsell referred to this man as Corporal Harvey, Hansen was suspicious. He asked his sergeant what the man's real name was. Sergeant Ackerman told him the real last name was not Benjamin, but that he was using the last name of Harvey. But Sergeant Ackerman said even though the man was using the last name of Harvey, his real name was Oswald, and he was from Texas. Yeah, I don't buy that story at all. Kerry Thornley said that Lee spoke with no... You can't believe Kerry Thornley at all, so fuck everything he has to say. This photo is one of the Oswalds were taken at a station in Japan. He was not remembered as speaking Russian, reading Russian newspapers, or talking about communism. When the other Oswald showed up at El Toro, California in January of 58, he takes a Russian proficiency test a month later. In June, he has a date with Rosalind Quinn. Rosalind Quinn. Damn it. This just struck me because in Oswald's notebook, which I doubt the authenticity of, but nonetheless, he had a notation. He had the 757 French Street, New Orleans, like it was Lillian Moret's address, and he had the name Quinn, Quin, and then there was a comma, and then Moret. So is there a connection between Quinn, Rosalind Quinn, because she's the only Quinn in the damn story, and Lillian Moret? That definitely needs investigation. Who had been studying Russian intensely for a year and was very impressed with his conversational Russia. Naturally, his Russian was very good. This substitute had learned Russian as a child. I don't know that I believe that. I'm still looking into that. I'm starting to doubt Oswald spoke fucking Russian at all. At all. I think it might be a red herring. Do you remember Palmer McBride saying he had met Marguerite Oswald in 1958 in New Orleans? Because Lee was supposed to be in Japan at that time. This would suggest that Marguerite had knowledge of her son's affairs. A year later, when she was working at the King Candy Company in Fort Worth, she claimed injury when a candy box fell from her shelf onto her nose. Because of this mother's injury, Lee applied for and was granted a hardship discharge. or dependency discharge from the Marines. Some researchers have speculated that Marguerite's injury was staged in order to help Lee obtain an early discharge. Dr. Milton Goldberg, who had first treated Marguerite for her alleged injuries, said that he could find nothing wrong with her. Dr. Goldberg told the FBI that Marguerite said in January 59 that her son wanted to defect to Russia. This was 10 months before Lee went to Russia. These are tantalizing bits of evidence that suggest someone knew the future plans of Oswald long before the fact, including Marguerite. Oswald was in Russia from October 59 through May of 1962. During that time, are you aware of the dozens of FBI reports of Oswald in the U.S. during that time? Oh, is that redundant here? Yes, it is. You are probably familiar with the Bolton Ford episode in New Orleans in January 61, where an Oswald tried to buy trucks to be sent to Cuba. Yeah, that was Kerry Thornley. The order form listed the purchaser as Friends of Democratic Cuba, the company whose officers included Guy Bannister and Gerard Toujague. How many of you heard the name Ray Carney, news director for radio station K-Box in Dallas, Texas? He told the FBI he met with Lee Oswald on 3 occasions at the Dallas Garland Airport during May of 61. Oswald tried to persuade Carney, an amateur pilot, to fly Flying Tiger missions over Cuba and drop leaflets. Carney refused. Who does that sound like? It sounds more like Seymour than it does Kerry Thornley. How about Stephen Landsberg, who told the FBI that he and Oswald created demonstrations in New York City in 1961 and 62? Many articles appeared in New York papers concerning Landsberg following the assassination. He told the FBI that he, Oswald, and a man named Earl Perry created demonstrations in New York. When the FBI tried to obtain Perry's records from the Marines, they were told they would have to get clearance from the Pentagon. From the Pentagon! There are many FBI reports like these that you won't find in the Warren Commission volumes. When Oswald meets his future wife, Marina, she thinks he's a native Russian with a Baltic accent. You can't believe a goddamn thing she says. When she learns he's a foreigner, she asks which of his parents are Russian. Upon his return to Fort Worth, Lee impressed nearly all the native-speaking Russians with his command of the Russian language. Peter Gregory asked Lee if he were Polish because of Lee's accent when he spoke Russian. George de Mohrenschildt also noticed Lee's Polish accent and remembered discussing classical Russian literature with him in the Russian language. While in Russia in 62, Oswald wrote a letter to John Tower. A copy of that letter was read and studied by Professor Vladimir Petrov of the Slavic Language Department of Yale University. Professor Petrov, a native Russian, who wrote Senator Tower with his opinion and said the person who wrote the letter was a native-speaking Russian with an imperfect knowledge of the English language. If the professor was correct that the author of the letter, allegedly Oswald, was a native-speaking Russian, many previously unanswered questions regarding his Russian language capabilities could be understood. If this Lee Oswald was a foreigner who spoke native Russian, where did he come from? A clue may be found in this FBI interview of Mrs. Jack Tippit of Westport, Connecticut. She was telephoned shortly after the assassination by a woman with a foreign accent who read a newspaper article stating that Mrs. Tippit was related to the J.D. Tippit killed in Dallas. The woman had information she wanted Mrs. Tippit to pass on to people in Dallas. She said she would not identify herself because she was afraid of being killed. She told Mrs. Tippit she knew Oswald's father and uncle. They were Hungarians and lived at 77th Street and 2nd Avenue in New York. They were unemployed, received money from the communists, and spent all their time on communist activities. They may have been running an agent provocateur type intelligence operation on behalf of our intelligence services. They may have been among thousands of Eastern Europeans resettled in the States after World War II. Some of those people were Russian-speaking. If the person we know as Lee Harvey Oswald did come from New York, that could well be the reason for Marguerite Oswald's trip to New York in August of 52. Remember the story of how Lee Oswald became interested in communism when an old lady handed him a brochure on the Rosenbergs. A more plausible explanation would be that he learned about communism from his father and uncle in New York as a youngster. I don't buy that story at all. Not one bit. I think they're brothers. I think there's a possibility that Harvey Oswald was the father of Harvey Oswald, who's actually would then be a junior. But that's all speculation. Let me continue. Jim Garrison thought the Oswald in Russia may have been a foreigner. Garrison realized the possibility that they were dealing with two Oswalds, as evidenced by this memo to Lou Ivan. Garrison writes, "If you really want to know what I think, is that the Robert Oswald knew this returning defector was not really Lee, and this is what Robert's problem was the night of the assassination, when he found it necessary to take such a long drive to think things out. He knew things were far more complicated than they appeared on the surface." That was an understatement. On April 10th, 1964, Albert Jenner wrote a memo to J. Lee Rankin concerning memoranda prepared by John Ely of a chronology of Oswald's life. It was based on, quote, the existing data in our files of the background facts, life, school, places, and residence, etc. of Mrs. Oswald, her several marriages, her husbands, her 3 children, and in particular, Lee Harvey Oswald from the time she married Edward John Pick in the fall of 1929 to the time Lee Harvey Oswald entered military service in 1956. Mr. Jenner goes on to say, and I quote, our depositions and examination of records and other data disclose that there are details in Mr. Ely's memoranda which will require material alteration and in some instances omission. Material alteration and omission regarding the life of Lee Oswald and his mother. Those are the written words of Warren Commission attorney Albert E. Jenner. Listen to the words of John Pick. He told the Warren Commission, the Lee Harvey Oswald I met in November 1962 was not the same Lee Oswald I had known 10 years previous. When Attorney Jenner asked Pick how he looked physically as compared with when he'd last seen him, Pick replied, I would never have recognized him, sir. Did one Oswald fill out the 1959 passport application on the left where he has listed his parents' birthdays incorrectly by several years? Did another Oswald fill out the passport application on the right 3 years later and list the correct birthdays of his parents? Probably. Nope, that's incorrect. Totally incorrect. So, one thing I've learned is that these spies have to be taught when they fill out applications and passports and parents' names, they have to put some wrong information. They got to make it 8 or 9. They have to. I don't know why, but I found this stuff on Marilyn Moret's passport documentation. On her application for her passport, she put the wrong information for her fucking parents. Wrong birthdays and stuff. I'm like, are you kidding me? So, like, what the fuck? Maybe so as to not obfuscate the real use or proper use on an actual identity. That's the only thing I can think of. A Moscow photo of Lee Harvey Oswald, sometimes known as the Moscow photo. This Warren Commission exhibit is perhaps the best available photo of the real Lee Harvey Oswald. I don't know what he means by real Lee Harvey Oswald. Left slide, projector slide, G, split Moscow photo of Lee Harvey Oswald. Oh, he's talking about the passport photo. Yeah, that's correct. When each half of Oswald's face is viewed separately, it's easy to see that this photo is a composite, made from 2 different people. Slide 52, 4 photos of each Oswald with composite. Oswald was a creation of the intelligence community. 2 Lee Oswalds, one of them manipulated into the twisted maze of the Kennedy assassination. The implications of this scenario are far-reaching and indict elements of the government in the assassination and its cover-up both directly and indirectly. It began as an intelligence operation in the mid-1950s when a Russian-speaking person assumed the identity of Louisiana-born Lee Harvey Oswald. It continued when the Russian-speaking substitute, Oswald, was sent to the Soviet Union by our intelligence services. It ended when the substitute was killed by Jack Ruby, following the assassination of John Kennedy. The true identity of Lee Harvey Oswald could well be the reason for the past 32 years of cover-up. I believe that 100%. In conclusion, I hope my presentation has shown you that there is far more to Lee Harvey Oswald than the Warren Commission has told us. A thorough understanding of who Oswald really was and who directed him could lead us to people responsible for the assassination of John Kennedy. Thank you. All right, so obviously I agree with a lot of what he says here. There's a lot that needs more investigation. There's a lot I don't agree with. He could never get past this duality, and the duality was just one link in a chain. And he didn't seem to be able to see past that. He applied this 2 Oswald theory all the way up to, like, stuff going on in the book depository and stuff. I'm like, you're fucking crazy. So, but that is going to do it for me today, guys. All you should go out and pick up my new book, Lee Harvey Oswald in Black and White, right here. It's available on Amazon. And I'm going to try to do these videos, well, more religiously. I'll say that. Because I'm not a fan of video in general. So, but who knows? Maybe I'll keep it up. Maybe I won't. We'll see. But that's going to do it for me, guys. Subscribe to my Substack, bloodyhistory.substack.com. And for everything else, CoreyHughes.org has all my info. So that's it for me, guys, today. I'll see you guys next time. Thanks.